thinking something fun to do would be to watch watch the Exodus movie with Charlton Heston. That would be pretty cool. Uh, we've got a few more plagues to go through, but we are going to get to the actual Exodus here before we get done. This is one of the coolest classic stories of the Bible. Let's keep reading. We're in chapter 10. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform the signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and your grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians, and how I performed my signs with them, and that you may know that I am the Lord." Verse 3. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow, and they will cover the face of the ground so that it cannot be seen, and they will devour what little you have left after the hail, and including every tree that is growing in your fields. They will fill your houses and the houses of your officials and all the Egyptians, something that neither your parents nor your ancestors have ever seen, from the day they settled in this land until now." And then Moses turned and left Pharaoh. Pharaoh's officials said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go, that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not realize that Egypt is ruined?" Then Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. "Go worship the Lord your God," he said. But tell me who will be going." Moses answered, "We will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, and with our flocks and our herds, because we are to celebrate a festival to the Lord." Pharaoh said, "The Lord be with you if I let you go, along with your women and children. Clearly you are bent on evil. No, have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you've been asking for." Then Moses and Aaron were driven out of the Pharaoh's presence. Verse 12. And the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over Egypt so that locusts swarm over the land and devour everything that's growing in the fields, everything left by the hail." So Moses stretched out his staff over Egypt, and the Lord made an east wind blow across the land, and that all that day and night, and by morning the wind had brought the locusts. They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. Never before had there been such a large plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. They covered the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail. Everything growing in the fields and on the fruit trees. Nothing green remained on a tree or a plant in all the land of Egypt. Verse 16, Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "I have sinned against the Lord your God, against you. Now forgive my sin once more, and pray to the Lord your God that he will take this deadly plague away from me." Verse 18, Moses left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord changed the wind, and a very strong west wind, which caught up the locusts and carried them into the Red Sea. Not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. Verse 21, Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand towards the sky so that darkness spreads over Egypt, darkness that can be felt." So Moses stretched out his hand towards the sky, and total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. No one could see anyone else or move about for 3 days, yet all the Israelites had light in all the places where they lived. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, "Go, worship the Lord. Even your women and children may go with you, but leave only your flocks and herds behind." Verse 25. But Moses said, "You must allow us to have sacrifices and burnt offerings to present to the Lord our God. Our livestock must go with us. Not a hoof is to be left behind. We have to use some of them in worshiping the Lord our God, and until we get there, we will not know what we are to use to worship the Lord." But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was not willing to let them go. Pharaoh said to Moses, "Get out of my sight. Make sure that you don't appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die." "Just as you say," Moses replied. "I will never appear before you again." Chapter 11. Now the Lord had said to Moses, "I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that he will let you go from here. And when he does, he will drive you out completely. Tell the people that the men and the women alike are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and gold." The Lord made Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt by Pharaoh's officials and by the people. Verse 4. So Moses said, "This is what the Lord says, about midnight I will go through Egypt, and every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh who sits on the throne, and to the firstborn son of the female slave who is at her handmill, and the firstborn of all of the cattle as well. And there will be a loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been before will be again. But among the Israelites not a dog will bark, and not any person or animal. Then you will know how that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. All these officials of yours will come to me, bowing down before me and saying, 'Go, and you and all your people who follow you, and after that I will leave.'" And then Moses, hot with anger, left Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses, "Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in Egypt." And Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go out of his country. Chapter 12. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is before you for the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that that on the 10th of day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. And if any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share it with with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. So you are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect. You may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight, and then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and the tops of the door frames of the house, where they eat the lambs. That same night they are to eat the meat roasted on the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water. It must be but roasted over a fire, with the head, the legs, and the internal organs. Do not leave any of it until morning. If some is left until morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, and your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. Verse 12. On the same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals. I will bring judgment on the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign on the houses where you are, and then when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. Verse 14. This day you are to commemorate for the generations to come. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. For 7 years you are to eat bread made without for 7 days, you are to eat bread made without yeast. On the first day remove the yeast from your houses, for whoever eats anything with yeast in it from the first day through the seventh must be cut off from Israel. On the first day hold a sacred assembly, and another one on the 7th day. Do not work at all on these days, except to prepare food for everyone to eat. That is all you may do. Verse 17. Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread, because it was on this very day that I brought your divisions out of Egypt. Celebrate this day as a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. In the first month you are to eat bread made without yeast, from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day. For 7 days no yeast is to be found in your houses, and anyone, whether foreign or native born, who eats anything with yeast in it must be cut off from the community of Israel. Eat nothing made with yeast, wherever you live. You must eat unleavened bread. And then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go at once and select the animals for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood in the basin, and put the blood on the top and both sides of the door frame. None of you shall go out of the door of your house until morning. When the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood at the top and the sides of the door frame, and he will pass over that doorway. He will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. Verse 24. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as he promised. Observe this ceremony, and when your children ask you, What does this ceremony mean to you? Then tell them, It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over our houses over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt, and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians. Then the people bowed down and worshipped. The Israelites did just what the Lord commanded, and Moses and Aaron. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was a loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. Verse 31. During the night Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron. Up! Leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go. And also bless me. Verse 33. The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, we will all die. So some of the people took their dough before the yeast was added, and they carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs and wrapped clothing. The Israelites did as Moses instructed, and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people. and they gave them what they asked for, and so they plundered the Egyptians. Verse 37. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, where where there were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both with flocks and herds. And with the dough the Israelites had brought from Egypt, they baked loaves of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast, because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. Now, the length of time for the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt, because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. Now, on this night, all the Israelites are going to keep vigil to honor the Lord for generations to come. Verse 43. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "These are the regulations for the Passover meal. No foreigner may eat it. Any slave you have bought may eat it after you have circumcised him, but a temporary resident or a hired worker may not eat it. It must be eaten inside the house. Take none of the meat outside the house. Do not break any of the bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it." Verse 48. A foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover must have all the males in his household circumcised. Then he may take part in one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat it. The same law applies to the native born and to the foreigner who residing among you. Verse 50. All the Israelites did just what the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. And on that very day the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions. Chapter 13. The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me the firstborn male, the first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal." Then Moses said to the people, "Commemorate this day when you come out of the day that you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Today, in the month of Aviv, you are leaving, when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and Jebusites, the land he swore to your ancestors to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey. You are to observe this celebration in this month. For 7 days eat bread made out of yeast, and on the 7th day hold a festival to the Lord. Eat unleavened bread during the week. During those 7 days, nothing with yeast is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be anywhere in your borders. On that day, tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. This observance will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead that this law of the Lord is to be on your lips. For the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. You must keep this ordinance at the appointed time, year after year." Verse 11. After the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites and gives it to you, as he promised on oath to you and your ancestors, you are to give over to the Lord the first offspring of every womb. All the firstborn males of your livestock belong to the Lord, redeeming with a lamb every firstborn donkey. But if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. In the days to come, when your son asks you, "What does this mean?" say to him, "With a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals, in Egypt. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb, and redeem each of my firstborn sons. And it will be like a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand. Verse 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though it was shorter, for God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road towards the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry up my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Then, verse 14, or chapter 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and to encamp near Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea, directly opposite of Baal-zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh, and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. Verse 5. Then the king of Egypt was told that the Pharaoh had fled. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh had his officials change their minds about them and said, what have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services. So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. Verse 7, he took 600 of his best chariots, along with the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites, who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they encamped by the sea near Pi-Hahiroth, opposite of Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were Egyptians marching after them. When they were terrified and cried out to the Lord, they said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us into the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone and let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Verse 13. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord. Deliverance the Lord that will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still. And then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch your hand over the sea to divide the water, so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go after them, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and his army, and through his chariots and his horsemen, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain the glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Verse 19. Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from the front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness on one side and light on the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. And then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind, and it turned into dry land. The waters were divided, and Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Verse 23, the Egyptians pursued them, and all the Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from a pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so they had difficulty driving, and the Egyptians said, "Let us get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Verse 26, then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back into its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen. The entire army of Pharaoh had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. Verse 29. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses his servant. Chapter 15. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. "I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both the horse and the driver he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has hurled into the sea. The best of Pharaoh's officers are drowned in the Red Sea. The deep waters have covered them. They sank to the depths like a stone. Your right hand, Lord, was majestic in power. Your right hand, Lord, shattered the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you threw down those who opposed you. You unleashed your burning anger. It consumed them like stubble. By the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The surging waters stood up like a wall. The deep waters congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy boasted, "I will pursue. I will overtake them. I will divide the spoils. I will gorge myself on them. I will draw my sword, and my hand will destroy them." But you blew with your breath, and the sea covered them, and they sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you? Majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders. In your unfailing love you will lead the people you have redeemed, and in your strength you will guide them into your holy dwelling. The nations will hear and tremble. Anguish will grip the people of Philistia. The chiefs of Edom will be terrified. The leaders of Moab will be seized with trembling. The people of Canaan will melt away. Terror and dread will fall on them. By the power of your arm they will be as a stone, until your people pass by, Lord. Until the people you brought pass by, you will bring them in and plant them on the mountain of your inheritance. The place, Lord, you've made for your dwelling, the sanctuary, Lord, your hands established. The Lord reigns forever and ever. Verse 19. When Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen went into the sea, the Lord brought the waters of the sea back over them, but the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. When Miriam, the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her with timbrels and dancing, Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both the horse and the driver he has hurled into the sea." Verse 22. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water, and they came to Marah. They could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" And then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. There the Lord issued a rumbling instruction for them and put them to the test. He said, "If you listen carefully to the Lord, your God, and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep his decrees, I will not bring on you any of these diseases I brought on the Egyptians. For I am the Lord who heals you." Then they came to Elim, where they were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. Well, that's the end of our reading today. It's interesting. It's really interesting. God's promises to his people, I hope that we're getting the context. I hope that it's sinking in as you guys are reading, as we're reading the Bible together here. I hope that the context of all of this stuff kind of goes through. That's one of the biggest things, that one of my pet peeves is using even a verse out of context. And that's one of the best things about doing this Bible reading, is that we get the whole context. You could take verses out of the Bible, just a verse out of context, and make the Bible say whatever you want, but that doesn't make it right. And the verse doesn't mean what you say it means when you do that. So the context is everything. It's everything in your conversations. When I say something and I don't explain myself well, it's hard for you to understand what it means. It's hard for us to understand the whole story of the Bible. Moses had a hard time understanding. In the beginning, he just didn't realize that he was just supposed to obey. He wasn't doing any of this in his own power, and he was just trying to find excuses. We all do that. God loves you, brothers and sisters. I love you too. See you tomorrow. Happy Palm Sunday. Think about that today. Read this. Read the last quarter of Luke there. It'll bless you. It'll bless your heart. Just read a chapter or so every day this week. Love you. Mean it. Bye-bye.